So anyway, last time we talked, we were talking about the distinction between the leadership that you had to exert in the city versus leadership in the private sector and leadership and management, I should say.
Sure.
So would you talk a little bit more about that? Because I thought you had such wonderful insights.
Well, usually my first response is my best response. So who knows what I'll come up with today, but I'll try to replicate what we talked
You don't
about.
have to replicate it. New thoughts are just as
what we talked about last week. No, I mean, obviously there are many similarities, across the different, enterprises. To some extent, leadership is leadership, but there is, I think, something different in the public sector versus the private sector. The commitment that the leader makes for an elected official is a very public engagement. You run for office. Hopefully more people vote for you than someone else. You win. You get sworn in. And at that moment, if not before, there is a compact. There's a public compact that is made between you and the citizens. This, again, this wonderful American experiment that power is derived from the people. They give it to you. You hold an office. It's not yours. It's actually theirs. You're just sitting there for a while.
It's interesting you say that about the compact. I had this really weird experience in that domain. And, I used to spend a lot of time with mayors, but then I had the opportunity to watch the mayor of Tampa get sworn in. And I'd never actually been to that, ceremony before. And this particular mayor, prior to the swearing in, I knew personally. And, I helped with the campaign and all of that kind of thing. But, she wasn't mayor to me.
Right.
And then I saw her get sworn in, and it was almost like you could see and feel the state change, like an ontological change between who she was prior to the swearing in and who she was after the swearing in. Yeah. And you could see her become mayor instantaneously.
Right. Yeah. I had a similar experience. I'd been around, at least locally, a number of my predecessors. I was in city council 14 and a half years. I worked closely with two different mayors. I've watched other mayors across the country. But at my first inauguration, there's a run of show, the council and the mayor and a bunch of other folks get sworn in at the same time. So, I had seen this movie before, and I won 4 times. So, but as I'm sitting there and I'm following the script and the program rather, and as they get to the part where it's, soon to be my time, as with anything big like this, your heart is racing, you're starting to, anticipate, there's a prayer, there's a song, right? What's getting ready to happen. And then they call you up, and there's the judge, a friend of mine who I'd asked, my family is around me. And, I put my, left hand on the Bible, right hand up. And, again, you've seen this play out on TV, and one, right, you repeat after me, and right. And I could feel, no one really noticed, but my hand was shaking a little bit. And I could feel with every word, every phrase that I was saying and repeating, which I knew well, that this thing was happening, that I was about to become the mayor of the 5th largest city in America, the birthplace of freedom, liberty, and democracy, the only place that has the Liberty Bell, where the founding fathers came for the Declaration of Independence, the constitutional conventions, and many other significant things. And that now you are responsible for and to 1.5 million people in this city, and at least some level of leadership in the region. millions of other people. And so, yeah, it's like, that there's a commercial on about this thing that gets, if you want to like redo your bathtub, and they like
Can't wait
literally
to hear
put,
this. I can't wait to hear this transition.
they put the thing, whatever the stuff, the new thing is, they put it on top of the old one, right? It's like a uniform comes, descends on you, and you are now that person.
Mhm.
And so, hearing what you shared about your friend, and so now it's everything you do, everything you say, everywhere you go, has significance to someone. And so, in the private sector, I think for the most part, people don't get sworn into their jobs,
Maybe
right?
they should.
They may do a lot of swearing, but they don't have to get sworn in. Or they may get sworn at. They have, a board of directors and shareholders and investors and, customers, the whoever's using the service, buying the product, whatever the case may be. I think their decision making is a little different, right? Because it is all in the best interest of the enterprise.
Mm.
Most decisions, don't want to be too general, but most are about preserving and protecting the enterprise. And certainly as an elected official.
By the enterprise, though.
The business.
Yeah, I mean, the revenue, the profit.
The revenue, profits, earnings, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, product safety. I mean, you don't want people to get hurt or die or get sick or whatever the case may be, but it's what would I say?
Like there are limited stakeholders.
It's very internal. It's very inward focused.
Mm-hmm.
It is about, kind of wrapping your arms around this place, this building, this company, this name, this reputation, the goodwill. And I think that the public official really has to do both. It is about the government, and it does have a reputation, and it does have things that it has to preserve, but there are people. I mean, you have this connection and relationship with your customers, right? But in a very, very different way.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just that much more personal, right? And the nature of the engagement. And so I think that, and there are lessons to be learned, certainly from both. I've watched, listened to, observed, learn what not to do from private sector leaders and public service leaders as well. And so, the leaderships are not mutually exclusive, but there are some differences.
One of the things that you said when we last spoke that really struck me was about the temporality of the different roles. Like businesses come and they go. I mean, even if you're CEO of a legacy business, there is always still the possibility of the business going out of business. They typically have a finite lifetime.
Or you being fired.
Right. Well, yeah, but whether it's 10 years or 50 years, we're still talking about something that ultimately has a beginning, a middle, and an end, even if you're not around for that.
Right.
And one of the things you said about being the mayor of a city is about the fact that the city goes on.
Yeah.
Whether you're there or not, the city continues. It has citizens, it has infrastructure, it has all of that.
Right.
And about how that changes your relationship to the enterprise.
Yeah. Well, again, in Philadelphia, at least, we have a 2 consecutive term limit, right? So the most you can do at one time is the 8 years, right? Philadelphia is 400 years old, right? So 8 years in the span, right? I mean, it's kind of really small,
right,
in the whole scheme of things, right? So, part of this job, when I was in the job, part of it is just understanding where you are and what you mean in the whole scheme of things, right? There will be a Philadelphia. I mean, I don't know of any city in the country that has gone away.
Right.
Right now, we know from ancient times. I mean, some civilizations have gone, and I don't know, in the year 4000, who knows? But in our lifetimes and in our history, right, cities don't go away. They don't get bought.
Right.
They don't merge generally into something else, right? Like companies do, right? They get bought and sold, every other day. And so there is a permanence and a sustainability, if you will, and a longevity that you also have to take into consideration. So when you come into office with, your new ideas and your new people, and we're going to do this and that and the other thing, I mean, you take your little campaign operation, the little startup that you created to get yourself elected, and then you actually merge that into the government in many instances. I mean, you take, some, many, all of your campaign people, and, and they often come into the government, and that campaign thing basically kind of goes away.
But doesn't it kind of merge? I mean, the way I think about it, and I've thought about this since you described this to me, I don't think I thought about it before. You come in from the campaign with all of these ideas, but there's a way in which I think even if you've been on council and so forth, you can't quite anticipate the way in which your campaign and the elongated sort of tenure of the city are going to have to perform a kind of post-merger integration, much in the same way that merging companies do, except that you only have 8 years to impose your ideas on this long-lasting thing.
Well, here's the thing. It's really important to remember that before you came along with all your brilliance, I mean, the place was operating.
Right.
It did exist, right? I mean, I wasn't there with William Penn, laying out like how Philadelphia is going to, right? So it's like, well, we were doing stuff before you got here. So, if you had to figure out how to kind of fit in with our thing. And by the way, you're not actually going to be here that long. So, don't get too comfortable. And so, yeah, you and all your quote unquote brilliant ideas, sometimes if you do the research, you'll find that, well, actually some other people had that same idea, maybe about 20 years ago, and they tried it and it didn't work. Not to say that it won't work this time, but, so in many ways, there aren't that many new ideas. There are variations on some other ideas and old ideas, and often you can, hit the jackpot and come up with something really good. But it really is about understanding, how do you translate ideas and campaign promises into public policy or legislation. And you do have to merge your interests into an understanding of, how does this place function and operate? What is the ethos here? What's the culture here? You also have to remember, unless you're in we don't have any dictatorships. So, not everybody was for you.
Right.
Including maybe some of the people in the government.
Right.
I mean, maybe not on your staff, but in other parts of the government, they didn't have to be for you, right? So you have to, and the key word there is humility. You have to humble yourself. Even after the big electoral win, you have to humble yourself to understand that other people have ideas also. Some of those ideas might actually be better than yours.
How do you think that humility functions in the private sector? Because in my own thinking, humility is this kind of fundamental leadership principle. But I wonder how the two differ. And you've been in both.
Yeah. So I think it might be a little trickier in the private sector. I mean, sometimes people do take, as I say, kindness for weakness or humility for weakness, or they want this, rough and tough, ram charging, kind of person, and so I think it gets displayed in different ways, and it's company has a new product. It's going gangbusters. Now, the executive CEO, can rightly, take credit for bringing it to market, or, sales are up or whatever. But humility would be, let me bring the engineer
Mhm.
to the next board meeting and say, I appreciate all the props that I've been getting, and I'm glad to take them. But you know that I didn't actually design the whatever. Here's the lady who did it. Here's the guy who did it. Right? We need
It's
to recognize them.
it's interesting you bring that up because, as you probably know, most of my clients are high growth startups. They're not big corporations. And in startups, that's really common because the CEO needs to sort of impress the board of directors and the investors with the expertise of his team, that the team is growing and it's growing really fast. It's not that unusual to bring the head of product or the head of engineering into the board meeting to to present the deck or present the part of the presentation that deals with their part. And is that less common in big organizations?
It's my sense. I mean, I haven't worked at a big place in a long, long period of time, but I don't. And it may also depend on the company in terms of what their culture is. But I think it is an important. It's an important management and leadership tool. Is giving credit, sharing. Sharing the credit, sharing the glory, whatever the case may be. And I think that is a critical component of leadership. It is a reminder and a public recognition that, you're not doing all this work by yourself. You're not the great I is, and that you believe in team.
So speaking of team, how do you either suggest or how did you actually go about taking your idea and, let's say, your strategy, your vision for the next 8 years of the city of Philadelphia and driving it through the different stakeholder communities? So through your team, through the government at large, and through your other stakeholders, which would be, citizens, visitors, etc. How'd you do that?
Well, part of it is not to get too spiritual, but there's a passage that says, "Where there is no vision, the people perish."
Mhm.
And so, again, I believe a big part of leadership is about laying out a vision. Why did you run? What are you seeking to accomplish? Where is this going? And you have to paint a vision, a picture of not only what is, but what can be. And you need people to buy into that vision and to understand it. And so you need to be clear, you need to be concise, you need to be consistent, what I call the 3 C's of communication. And lay that out to people. And not in Pollyanna's terms, not that it's going to be so easy. If it was all easy, it would have been done before. So, there's going to be some tough stuff, some tough decisions, et cetera, et cetera. And then finding teammates. I carefully constructed the top leadership of the government. And I needed folks to, first and foremost, commit to honesty to me and integrity to the public, that they understood the vision and where things were going, that I had their back, and that we rise and or stumble together. We're not going to have finger pointing. We're not going to have backbiting. We're not going to have, whisper. campaigns and backstabbing and throwing people under the bus. One of us does something, messes up, stumbles, gets in trouble, whatever the case may be, we're all in together. And I had a fantastic team. And none of us saw the Great Recession coming, in 08, 9, 10, 11. But, I stay in touch with all those folks on a regular basis. We went through the fire together. We're all now out of government, and I stay on top of, what they're doing, with their lives now. And that level of camaraderie, that level of commitment is what allowed us to do a bunch of the things that we did. But they bought into the vision, and they understood it.
And, we're dealing with this pandemic right now. And of course, the pandemic has hit every organization in a different way. Certainly, city governments have had to adjust in remarkable ways to deal with it. When you were the mayor and you got hit with the recession, which I think you could consider to be an analogous kind of unexpected crisis, what are some of the ways in which you had to sort of turn the ship? And what are some of the things you tried that failed, and how did you deal with that?
Yeah. So I think the one of the most critical issues was getting out in front of. So we announced that we had a problem actually before the federal government declared the recession.
I mean, would you say a little bit about Philadelphia at that time? Because there was very specific conditions in Philadelphia. There were conditions in Philadelphia.
So, when I came in, the election was in November of 07, sworn in January of 08. People were happy, mayor, reform, change, blah, 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 painted a vision, great inaugural speech. First budget was fantastic, sailed through city council. They were happy. We're making some investments in, some areas that maybe have been neglected, blah, blah, blah. I mean, things were good. Midsummer, we started to see some unusual activity in revenue collection. And by the end of the summer, we knew we had some problems. We didn't know what the problem was. Philadelphia had its own financial issues in the late 80s, early 90s that caused us to have an oversight board created by the state. And we have some fundamental structural issues still with our finances. We're overly reliant on the wage tax. We have a very poor population with, unfortunately, the poorest big city in America, of the 10 largest cities, highest poverty rate. So, there are a number of challenges, but we were growing and doing and things were rolling along. When we realized or had a better sense of the magnitude of the problem, and it just happened to be the date, not a date you ever want to announce anything on, but it was Thursday, September 11th. We announced that the city had a $450 million 5-year plan deficit. But we were very careful in our language. We said at least, because we knew that it was going to grow. And so again, that's language, managing expectations, telling the truth, become critically important. We didn't know the end of the story, but we knew where we were, and we knew that 450 was not going to be the final number.
And you knew that promising a specific solution based on that information would be foolhardy and unfair.
And wrong and a disaster politically. So that was September. In October, we announced that the number had grown to between 650 and 850 million.
Wow.
And so the difference there is we had a number, said at least. Now we did a range because we knew things were fluid and moving. Now, the story gets, it gets, in a government way, weirdly funny, ironic. How about that's a better word? So when we made the announcement in October, we said to the public that we would, we thought we'd have a more final number maybe by the end of the month. Well, in the meantime, the Philadelphia Phillies were now in the playoffs, which no one expected them to be in the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
And there was one other thing going on in the fall of 2008, which was the presidential election.
Right.
Right. So by the time we made our announcement in October, the federal government had declared that we were in a recession, which actually started in December of 2007. Senator Obama, Senator McCain are running for president. George Bush is president. They announced a TARP program, right? So they ran back to Washington so they could vote on all that. And in the meantime, the Phillies then, at the end of October, won the World Series. And then we had a parade.
It's kind of ironic given the deficit in the city and the conditions in the country.
And then Barack Obama became
And
president.
Obama got elected. And then there's this huge glimmer of happiness in the midst of everything.
Well, for 2 days, because 2 days later on Thursday, I announced that we had a $1.4 billion
Oh my God.
5-year plan deficit.
So it had gone from 500 million to 1.2 billion over the course of what, a few months.
Yeah.
And then what? Then how did you align your team and pivot to do whatever you had to do about that?
So a lot of conversations about literally continuity of government. What are our critical services? What do we have to do?
And what can we not do?
Either what can we not do, what can we do less of? And we took the position that we could not cut our way out of this. And there were only so many limits. There was a limitation on how far we could go from a tax standpoint. So, so we agreed on a message, which was, this was a shared sacrifice, that everyone had to give something, had to give up something.
Mm-hmm.
And that we were going to raise taxes, cut services, stop providing some services, and try to save every nickel, dime, and quarter that we could, anywhere we could, full on.
And that's a
First
hell of a
announcement.
promise, because what you're doing now is you're setting yourself up potentially for, if there's an error within your administration, the tabloids and the press are going to explode it after declaring that.
Yes. So, as I say, charity begins at home. So I can't, my basic philosophy is I can't ask the citizens to do what I'm not prepared to do. So the first announcement was that I was cutting my salary and the salary of all the top people in the government. And as a matter of fact, everyone down to $50,000 was taking some amount of both pay cut and furlough days to save money. Now, people understood that me cutting my salary by 10% was not going to solve the deficit.
It represented something.
It's called a shared sacrifice. And clearly the mayor of Philadelphia makes a whole lot more money than, most people in the city. But, again, everybody doing their part. We looked at every service, every program, everything that we spend money on. And I asked the managers to give me plans on varying levels of cuts, 1%, 2%, 5%, and what the impact would be on service levels. Because again, a government is the ultimate service organization. That's the only reason for the government to exist, is to provide service. That's what we do, right?
Sorry, I have a cat that's
Yeah, no, I saw the activity. So, but again, it's putting those folks around the table, it's getting their ideas, it's getting their input, it's figuring out what's really important here. It's not about our reputations, it's not about whether people are going to like us, it's not about whether people are even going to agree on what we're doing. But you have to have a plan. And then you have to articulate that plan. And then you have to be prepared for a reaction to the plan.
Mhm.
But even with all that, I mean, most of the time, most people didn't have better ideas than we did. So,
Yeah.
I mean, you can holler at me, but unless you have a better idea, that's not solving the budget problem, right? So, and that's where you get tested. I mean, that's where the leadership comes out. As I say, anybody can steer a boat in calm water,
Right.
right? It's when the waves are crashing up over the bow or the stern or whichever way, any side of the boat, right? That's, and it's foggy and it's raining. And I mean, that's when it gets tricky, right? And you've got to navigate. And you have to navigate with some moral conviction. You have to navigate with truth. You have to navigate with a focus. And again, you're dealing with what's in front of you, but you're always looking at the horizon. You're always trying to figure, where are we really going, right? And it's about, enthusiasm. It's about trying to uplift people. I mean, I understood, especially during that time. I mean, I think I always kind of understood this, but I really understood it during the recession times. The moment I stepped out of my car, when they bring me to City Hall, the moment you step out of that vehicle, people are looking
Mhm.
for a sign, right? So, I mean, if I get out and I'm, just kind of trudging along and somebody says hi and you just grunt at them or whatever, it's like, oh my God, if he feels like that, things must really be bad, right? So, you got to jump out of there and you got to jump into it and give people that big hello and, hey, how you doing and what's going on? And and because you gotta keep spirits up. I mean, part of the job is being the chief cheerleader.
One of the things, there are actually two things. One is, that's kind of, from my standpoint, I've always thought that the politicians that matter are mayors, because you can't escape your constituents. Like, you have to live in the city, you have to go to the grocery store, you got to fill up with gas.
Gotta go somewhere, right?
Yeah, your house is right there in the city. Like,
Yeah.
it's not like you have the White House with gates
Yeah.
all around it and
Right.
constituents
No,
are in Texas.
it's very personal. It's very
But
personal.
the other thing is, in thinking about that huge deficit and what you do about it, I think about my clients when, they hit the wall with the pandemic, but they have the ability to go and raise more capital or to
Right.
diversify their product line or whatever. Whereas in the city, you have these really strict constraints.
Mhm.
Cities don't have a revenue stream beyond taxation.
Right.
How do you navigate? I mean, if all you can do is cut and raise taxes, how do you strategize within those enormous constraints?
Right.
How much creativity is available to you?
Well, I think, this was not new at the time, but we certainly developed an even greater appreciation for public-private partnerships. The developing enhanced relationships with the philanthropic community, foundations, and community organizations, clergy, religious community, all of, and obviously the corporate community and the work that they do. And so part of it again is, it's kind of like a coach to some extent. It's figuring out, which person, which entity needs to be playing what position, and how can they best, again, help and support the overall organization. And so, no, I mean, there's generally nowhere to go to raise more capital, right? And you can only go in the taxpayer's pocket so much and so deep. And they're only going to accept so many cuts
Right.
in service. Otherwise, like, well, why am I living here? Like, what am I doing? You're not doing anything for me, right? So, but again, I think if you can help people understand what you're trying to accomplish, what's the goal here? Times are tough. You have dinner conversation or sitting on the back porch talking about your finances. We're doing the same thing, right? We don't print the money. Actually, we just get it from you.
Right.
So, and we're trying to, be good stewards of it. But in the meantime, you still have to pick up the trash. You got to fill the potholes. Street lights got to work. And all the other services that are provided. So, you again, as we were talking about earlier, that's where that bond and that relationship and that trust, right? That even if people are upset, they will say, I know this is really hard. I mean, I've had people say to me, I didn't like some of the things that you did, but I know it was a really bad situation. And I know you're trying as best you can. And we just appreciate you,
Mm.
being out there for us. Hey, I mean, some days it's the best you're going to get. Right. So it's, and you got to have, and you got to have faith in people as well. And again, as we do this kind of a comparison between public and private sector, I think in many instances, the private sector people might not have that level of relationship with their customers, which does make that
Yeah.
engagement a
I
little
mean,
bit.
it is in many cases, a very remote relationship between
Yeah.
a business and its customers.
Yeah.
And when, in the situation that businesses are in right now, it looks to me like the demand for communication and empathy and humility really came more with the relationship of leaders to their teams, where, they're having to lay off people or furlough. Even, I have clients who are fairly senior people in the city of New York,
Mhm.
and New York has been furloughing people.
Yeah.
And because of the situation right now,
Mhm.
and businesses that I know of have done the same, they've laid off 40% of their staff.
Right.
That relationship looks really tenuous to me between a leader and the staff he or she is laying off.
Yeah.
How do you, I guess, something like soften the blow or maintain that cord of connectivity
Yeah.
in the face of having to do something so brutal?
Well, I mean, there's not much that is more painful than having to lay people off. And I had made the decision, and different cities did different things. So this is not a commentary on who did what or how they did it. I made the decision that we were not laying people off, which was part of the reason why we had to keep raising taxes. But I just couldn't really wrap my head around having to lay people off from their job through no fault of their own.
And in the middle of a recession.
Right. I mean, they didn't cause it. They didn't create it. It wasn't because they were not a good employee. They've still got bills. They got a house. They got a car. They got an apartment, whatever their case may be, kids in school, college. And, I just couldn't do it. And so they were certainly not in a mass kind of way. I mean, there were different situations. I think in the private sector, that issue it's really all about how you not only deliver that message, but, do you help people, apply for their unemployment or, get some other, benefits or something that they need, or try to make any other connection. Do you stay in touch with them? During that period of time. I mean, they can't spend any of that, but again, at the supermarket, but that connection, that level of relationship, that you care,
Right.
actually does mean something to folks. And if and when things turn around, they, unless they found something else, would be likely to come back to you. But in that instance, often that bond gets broken, and it's really, really tough.
Yeah, I mean, right now, some of my clients have had to lay off people.
Yeah.
And they've tried really hard to help them find another job, keep their benefits on as long as they can.
Yeah.
But I wonder about the employees, because even if they come back, let's say in September, everything's good, has that breach of trust, so to speak,
Yeah.
now created a rift that's going to take years to recreate?
Yeah, I think it really depends. It's often a function of how the news was delivered, what was the relationship prior to, and what you did in the interim to look out for them.
So you're now a professor, and I assume that you're teaching something related to leadership.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So if you could distill, the key messages that you're teaching your students, not to co-opt their benefit, but since we're not all going to the same university where you're teaching, what would you say are the key messages that you want your students to leave with?
Be yourself. Authenticity is one of the most important things, and people can figure out whether that's really you, or is that a manufactured version of you. Ethics, critically important, which is probably not taught enough in schools. I've now developed, I can send to you, I've developed what I refer to as Nutter's rules. And just a little pithy, so especially in the political side, I say, first rule of politics is define yourself before someone does it for you. Those kinds of things.
And if you send that to me, can I share it?
Oh yeah,
Okay, good.
Yeah. Never let somebody else tell your bad news. Just all kinds of stuff like that. So, but what I encourage them to do is, because some of them will probably run for office or go into public service, and I said, you have to find your passion. I found mine, and that's why I do what I do. And if you can figure out what your passion is and figure out how to get someone to legally pay you for it, you'll be a very happy person. The other thing I tell them is public service is one of the most fulfilling professions that you will ever experience. I can assure you, you will never make a lot of money in public service. Most of the people who try usually go to jail. So do your service, take your one paycheck, be happy, and then in the second life, go and try to make some money. But and then lastly is just you have to enjoy it. You have to want to do it. Right? I mean, it's in any position. I mean, there's nothing worse than, and I know people have to do different things, just because they have to do different things. But, pre-recession, pre-pandemic, I would say, you go to you're in a supermarket, in a checkout line, any store, whatever, and the person is just, kind of surly, and you got a bad attitude, and and a couple of times I literally did this. I would look over the counter thing, and they like, what are you? I'm looking for the ball and chain. I mean, why are you here? This is right. You're miserable. What are you doing? Right? You don't. Right? I mean, I understand people need to work, but you need to be doing something else.
Or you need to alter how you're being here.
This is not
get a choice in whether you may not get a choice in what job you have in certain circumstances, but you always get a choice in how you choose to be about it.
Yeah. So I just tell them, the day you wake up now, look, every day at any job, no job, including mayor. I mean, every day is not going to be a bowl of joy, but the day you wake up and lament having to go to work is the day you need to start thinking about a new job.
Yeah.
Right. So don't stay, I mean, again, personal circumstances notwithstanding, don't stay in a job where you're not happy.
Or if you have to stay in that job, find a way to have it be fruitful.
Right. Yeah. And like I said, everybody doesn't, I mean, you just can't jump up and quit your job. And generally you don't quit your job unless you have another one to go to. But, I mean, if you're just that unhappy, you need to start looking. Right. I mean, life is too short. I mean, it's like, don't drink bad glasses of wine. There's a lot of wine out here.